What if everything you thought you knew about the royal family was only the surface of a far more dangerous story? One filled with buried secrets, midnight confessions, and a revelation so explosive that it could shatter the monarchy in this fictional universe forever. What if the quietest, most disciplined member of the crown, Princess Anne, suddenly walked into the king's private study holding evidence that could tear the entire institution apart? And what if that evidence pointed to the unthinkable? That Queen Camilla, in this imagined storyline, may have been connected to the chain of events leading to the tragic demise of Princess Diana in a way no one ever suspected. These are the kinds of questions that unsettle even the most loyal supporters of the throne in this fictional realm, because once those questions are asked, the answers never come without consequences, and the shadows they illuminate refuse to fade back into darkness. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. In this alternate universe, the story begins not with a grand celebration or a ceremonial parade, but with a cold wind sweeping over the palace grounds long after midnight, the kind of wind that whispers that something is wrong. Imagine Princess Anne, a woman known for her steadiness, her discipline, her refusal to indulge in melodrama, wandering the dimly lit corridors, clutching a sealed envelope she never expected to find. Have you ever seen a person who rarely breaks show even the slightest tremor? Have you ever seen someone who built a life on duty suddenly question the very foundation of that duty? That is the energy crackling through this moment, because Anne doesn't just have a rumor or an opinion. She has something far heavier, something that forces her to rethink memories she buried decades ago, something that makes her wonder whether loyalty has a breaking point. And what happens when someone you trusted crosses a line you can never uncross? The palace at night feels like another world entirely. Portraits watch silently from their gilded frames. Hallways stretch like tunnels. Every sound echoes. Every footstep feels louder. And Anne's heartbeat, though she hides it well, thunders in her ears because she knows that once she opens the door to the king's study, everything changes. Isn't it strange how the most earth-shattering moments often begin in silence? How history shifts not with fanfare, but with the soft click of a door closing behind you. How a single piece of information, long hidden, can roll through an entire kingdom like an earthquake. She stands outside the study for one suspended second, silently debating. One more step, and the truth begins its irreversible march. Inside, King Charles, in this fictional world, is hunched over his desk, papers scattered, the weight of the crown visible in the slump of his shoulders. He has no idea what is coming. He expects a typical late-night briefing, maybe something about an event or a diplomatic issue. He doesn't expect his sister to look like she's carrying something radioactive. Have you ever told someone something you knew would break them? Something they thought they were prepared to hear, but weren't? Something that forces them to relive a wound they pretended had healed? That is the emotional powder keg waiting to ignite the moment and speaks. But she doesn't speak at first. She simply places the envelope on Charles's desk and watches his reaction. It's a strange act, calm on the surface, but stormy underneath. People forget Princess Anne has a steel spine, but steel still bends when pressure becomes unbearable. Charles frowns, confused. Something in Anne's expression startles him. He knows that look. It's the look she wore the night Diana died. The look of someone who sensed something was terribly wrong, but didn't yet know how wrong. That memory flickers across his mind like a ghost passing behind a candle flame. And then Anne says the words that change everything. It's about her, and it's about Camilla. Charles freezes. The air changes. Even the fire in the fireplace seems to crackle differently. Have you ever been hit with a truth that feels like a physical blow? One that makes your stomach drop? That's the moment unfolding here. Charles doesn't move. He doesn't breathe. In this fictional timeline, he knows there are things about the past he never fully examined, secrets he assumed were buried, questions he convinced himself weren't worth asking. But hearing and connect Diana and Camilla in the same breath makes him feel something he hasn't felt in years, dread, and slowly opens the envelope. A document slides out, its edges yellowed by time, its handwriting familiar even in the dim light. Diana's handwriting. And Charles's heart clenches with the force of a fist. The document is not a letter to a friend, not a diary page, not a personal note. It is something far more serious, Something recorded. Something preserved. Something meant for the crown only. Why would Diana write something like that? What was she afraid of? What did she know or suspect in those final months? And why did this document disappear for decades, only to resurface now? The questions multiply so fast they almost suffocate the room, and doesn't answer them yet. She lets Charles absorb the weight of the moment, because she knows this next part will break something inside him. Every family has secrets, but royal secrets, fictional or not, carry consequences that can crumble dynasties. She describes how she found it. Tucked behind a false panel in an old chest at her private residence, a chest no one had opened since the late 90s. A chest that once held keepsakes Diana gave, and small objects, handwritten notes, photographs. But this document wasn't a keepsake. It was a warning, and had no idea it existed. That detail shakes Charles even more. If and didn't know about it, who hid it, and why? Have you ever found something that made you question everything you believed? That's what Anne is experiencing. And now Charles must experience it too. She slides the document toward him. He hesitates. His hand shakes, slightly, but enough for Anne to notice. He finally picks it up. His eyes scan the first lines, and something inside him shifts. Because the document contains a claim Diana made in fear. A suspicion, a pattern she noticed, an unease that never left her. A sense that someone close to the family was working against her. Someone she could not name directly, but whose actions, words, and timing pointed in one chilling direction. Camilla. But the document doesn't outright accuse. It hints. It circles. It observes. It reveals contradictions and comments and incidents that, when stitched together, form a shape Diana didn't want to see but couldn't ignore. And Charles, reading this, feels a familiar nausea he hasn't felt in decades, the sense that he failed to protect someone who trusted him. But here's where the tension sharpens. And discovered something in the corner of the page. A mark. A symbol. A tiny detail that doesn't match Diana's style. Something added later. Something that suggests someone else may have handled the document after Diana wrote it. Why? To hide it? To protect someone? Or to ensure it never reached the crown? The contradiction is maddening. If Diana wanted the crown to see it, why didn't the crown see it? If she trusted Anne with it, why didn't Anne know it existed? And if someone intercepted it, what were they trying to suppress? These questions swirl inside Charles's mind like a storm pulling apart the sky. He looks at Anne, searching for answers she doesn't yet have. But she does have one more detail, something she's been holding back because it will hurt him most. She takes a breath. She steels herself. She leans closer. Charles, she says quietly, there's something else. Something you need to see. And after you see it, nothing will be the same. And just as she reaches into her coat for the second item, the one that deepens the mystery, the one that escalates everything, the one that points to a truth darker than either of them imagined, and pulls out the second item with the kind of slow, deliberate motion that tells Charles this is not simply another letter or a faded photograph. It is heavier, sharper, wrapped in a thick protective cloth as though it needed shielding from both dust and memory. The firelight flickers against it, sending shadows dancing across the walls, and for a moment neither of them moves, neither of them breathes, neither of them wants to confront the past that is suddenly, violently resurfacing. Have you ever held something that felt alive with tension? Something that carried the weight of a story desperate to be told? That's what fills the room as the cloth unravels, inch by inch, revealing a small, unassuming leather-bound journal. The kind Diana used to carry everywhere in this fictional universe. The kind she wrote in when she felt no one else was listening. Charles's throat tightens. He recognizes it instantly. Isn't it strange how objects can hold more memories than people? How something as small as a journal can drag a person back in time faster than any photograph or recording. He hesitates because opening it feels like opening a wound he spent years trying to forget. A wound he's never healed, only learned to cover. But Anne doesn't give him time to dwell. She flips it open to a marked page, one she clearly read multiple times before finding the courage to show him. The entry is dated only weeks before Diana's death in this alternate storyline. The handwriting is rushed, jagged, emotional, but unmistakably hers. The words spill across the page as if written in a moment of desperation, as if she needed to get them out before they consumed her. She writes about pressure, manipulation, strange encounters, comments that didn't sit right, conversations she overheard but didn't understand. And there, buried between lines of fear and hope, lies the sentence that changes the entire tone of the room. I feel they are watching me, especially her. Her. And lets the weight of the word hang in the air. Charles stares at it, numb. His mind races through every interaction, every argument, every moment from that chaotic chapter of his life. And though Diana doesn't write a name, he knows exactly who she meant because the rest of the page paints the picture clearly enough. Jealousy, tension, pressure, competition for Charles's attention, coldness masked as civility. The contradictions tear at him, because while part of him wants to dismiss the implication, another part recognizes the truth in the pattern Diana describes. People rarely invent patterns out of thin air. They notice what others choose to ignore. But here's the twist that punches him hardest, and flips to the back cover of the journal and reveals a folded note tucked into a hidden pocket. The ink is faded, the handwriting shaky, but the message is chilling. If anything happens to me, look closer. Charles's breath catches. That phrase, look closer, echoes in his mind like a bell tolling in a cathedral. It's not an accusation. It's a warning, and warnings are never given without reason. He places a trembling hand against the page as if touching it might somehow apologize for all the times he failed to protect her, failed to understand her, failed to hear her before it was too late in this imagined reality. But it isn't finished. She points to a faint imprint on the inside cover of the journal, something you'd only notice if you inspected it under bright light. A fingerprint. Not Diana's, and is certain of that. Not Charles's. Not hers. Someone else handled this journal long after Diana wrote in it. Someone with motive. Someone with opportunity. Someone who may have removed pages or added markings or hidden the document that ended up in his chest. Isn't it unsettling how one unknown fingerprint can feel more incriminating than 1,000 words? How it can unravel the illusion of closure you convinced yourself you had, and watches the realization pierce through Charles. She doesn't enjoy this. She isn't here to punish him. But she knows the truth. Even fictional truth doesn't care about comfort. It demands to be seen. And in that moment, she tells him what she discovered only hours before. Recent traces of handling on the journal's binding. Not from 2 decades ago, but recent. Someone at the palace touched it. Someone wanted to find it. Or hide it again. Charles feels the room shrinking, the walls closing in. Who would do that? Why now? How many people know? Could someone be trying to bury the past, or exploit it, or weaponize it? The questions pour in faster than he can process them, and he suddenly feels older, heavier, unsteady in a way he hasn't felt since the day Diana died in this fictional storyline, and leans back and lets him think. The silence stretches, thick and suffocating, until Charles finally speaks. Do you think she knew? And doesn't ask who he means. She knows. Yes, she replies softly. At least on some level. Diana always knew more than she said. It's strange how a single sentence can strip away the facade Charles has worn for years. He looks devastated, but also angry. Not at Diana. Not even at the universe that gave him so many second chances and took away so many first ones. He's angry because he realizes something he should have seen sooner. Someone around him had been moving pieces behind the scenes long before he knew the game had begun. And that's when Anne reveals the final blow of the introduction. She didn't come to Charles for his permission. She came to him because the situation has already escalated. In this fictional universe, someone leaked a fragment of Diana's note, the part about her, to an independent archivist who anonymously contacted Anne. And if an archivist has it, others might too. The palace no longer controls the narrative. The truth is on the verge of surfacing, and once it does, everything built on silence will collapse. Charles's face drains of color. His pulse thunders. You can feel the dread rolling off him. Anne asks the question that slices through what remains of the quiet. What will you do when they ask you about Camilla? The name lands like a blade splitting the air. Not because he blames Camilla entirely, not because he wants to believe the worst, but because the pieces, the journal, the note, the fingerprint, the timing, they point towards something he can't ignore anymore. Something he never imagined he'd have to confront. Something that could break the crown in this fictional universe. He looks at his sister, fear and fury crossing his expression. "What are you telling me, and what exactly are you implying?" And doesn't flinch. She holds his gaze with the unyielding strength that made her the most dependable royal for her entire life. She speaks slowly, clearly, knowing that these words are the threshold between stability and chaos. "I'm saying that the past isn't finished with us. I'm saying Samantha, Camilla's fictional birth name in this universe, knows more than she ever admitted. And I'm saying that if we don't confront this now, publicly or privately, someone else will. Someone who won't be gentle." Charles rises from his seat, pacing, trembling with the pressure of a truth he never wanted to face. He runs a hand through his hair, staring into the fire as though desperate for answers it cannot give. And just when he turns back to Anne, ready to ask what exactly she means by recent handling and someone inside the palace, and drops the final bombshell of the introduction, the sentence that will send us into Chapter 1 with a surge of adrenaline. "I know who touched the journal last," she says. "I know who hid the document, and I know why they did it. But you're not going to like the answer." Charles freezes. The room stills. The fire flickers. The air thins. And begins to speak. But that moment, that revelation, that name, have you ever felt a truth pressing against your mind so heavily that it refuses to let you sleep? No matter how tightly you shut your eyes, or how many times you tell yourself it can wait until morning. That is the kind of pressure-gripping princess, and in this fictional universe on the night, everything changes. It begins with a restlessness she cannot explain, a tug in her chest, a whisper in her thoughts, a sense that something she has forgotten is desperately trying to be remembered, and has never been one for superstition, never someone who allowed emotion to dictate action. Yet tonight something feels off, wrong, out of balance. The palace itself seems uneasy, as though the walls know something she doesn't. And that is the moment she realizes. She must return to the old chest Diana gave her decades ago, the one she hasn't opened since long before the tragedy that shattered their world. The corridors stretch before her like tunnels of memory, each step echoing with ghosts of the past. Isn't it strange how certain moments make the present feel thinner, like the past is pressing through the cracks? The portraits of former monarchs, cold, stoic, unblinking, stare down as if judging her for still caring so deeply about something that should have been buried with the years. And has never cared for appearances. She has always valued truth, even when it's inconvenient, uncomfortable, or dangerous. And tonight, truth is calling her name with a force she cannot ignore. Her private rooms are quiet, the kind of quiet that feels too heavy to be peaceful. She approaches the old chest. Carved wood, iron hinges, a royal emblem burned into the lid. She remembers Diana handing it to her with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She remembers Diana's voice, soft but trembling, saying, "Just keep it safe, Anne. Someday you'll understand." At the time, Anne thought Diana was simply overwhelmed, emotional, perhaps even paranoid. Now she wonders if she misread everything. Isn't it unsettling how hindsight reveals patterns you missed? How warnings feel clearer only when it's too late? And kneels, lifts the chest lid, and inhales the unmistakable scent of old paper and forgotten secrets. The journal is there, the envelope, but something else catches her attention. A tiny metal key tucked in a corner she never noticed. How could she have missed it? She picks it up, feeling the cold metal against her fingertips. A key to what? A drawer? A diary? A safe? Why would Diana hide it here unless she feared it being found by the wrong person? This is where the contradiction sharpens, and always believed Diana shared everything openly, but this key suggests otherwise. It suggests fear, secrecy, protection, and that realization cracks something inside Anne. She flips through the chest quickly, searching for anything that matches the key. A compartment, a lock, a hint, nothing. Yet she can't shake the feeling that the key belongs to something important, something intentionally kept away from prying eyes. Her anxiety mounts. The urge to find answers grows stronger. She doesn't understand why. Not yet, but she knows she must act. She cannot wait until morning. She cannot ignore the journal, the envelope, the key, or the sense of urgency gripping her chest like a warning bell. Something about this night feels orchestrated, as if fate is pushing her forward. And rises, gripping the journal and envelope. Her footsteps are firmer now, purposeful. She heads toward Charles's private study, the one place she knows she'll get answers, or at least force the questions into the open. The palace is silent except for the faint hum of the heating vents and the distant ticking of an antique clock. Every sound amplifies the tension building in her mind. She rounds a corner and stops. A shadow moves across the hallway ahead. She freezes. Her heart jolts. Someone is awake. Someone is moving through the palace at the same time, at this exact hour, in this exact corridor. Coincidence? Or something else? And steps back into the darkness, watching. The figure moves quietly, almost too quietly, too deliberate, too careful, as if they don't want to be seen. And she recognizes the silhouette. It's one of the senior palace staff members, someone trusted, someone with access, someone who rarely works this late unless something is terribly wrong. What are they doing near Charles's wing at this hour? Why aren't they carrying documents, tea trays, or reports? Why are they empty-handed, walking as though they're searching for something? And waits until the figure disappears down another hall. She knows better than to follow. Not yet. She needs clarity, not suspicion. But the encounter rattles her. The wrong person in the wrong place at the wrong time. And suddenly, the fingerprint on the journal seems even more sinister. Someone else has been handling Diana's belongings recently. Someone with access to areas they shouldn't be. Someone who may be watching the same secrets and is about to reveal. Her pace quickens as she approaches Charles's door. She hesitates only for a heartbeat before knocking softly. The door creaks open, and she enters. Charles looks up, startled, as though he's been yanked from a storm of thoughts. Papers lay scattered across his desk, but none of them matter now. Not compared to what Anne is about to show him. She places the journal and envelope on the table. The sight of Diana's handwriting fractures his composure instantly. Isn't it fascinating how memory can break a man faster than any physical blow? How guilt, regret, and love intertwine in ways that never truly resolve. And watches his reaction closely. She must be strong for him, even if the truth threatens to break her too. She explains how she found the items. She doesn't mention the key yet. She doesn't mention the shadow in the corridor. She sticks to the facts she knows he can process first. The document hidden for decades, the journal entry, the note in the back cover. Charles's eyes widen. His breath becomes shallow. He reads, rereads, rereads again. He whispers something and can't hear. Maybe a name, maybe a plea, maybe an apology. And then his hands begin to tremble. And moves closer, steadying herself. This is the moment she feared. The moment she didn't want to believe would come. She tells him there's more, the fingerprint, the recent handling, the secret key, the implication that someone in the palace might be hiding something connected to Diana's final weeks. Charles reacts with disbelief, then anger, then quiet horror. Why would someone do that, he whispers. Anne's response is simple, chilling, and true. Because the past is alive, Charles, and someone wants to control it. Have you ever watched someone's world tilt without warning? That's the expression on Charles's face now. A mix of fear, confusion, and a dawning recognition that nothing is as simple as he once believed. He asks the question she dreaded. Who do you think touched the journal last? This is where Anne pauses. Not because she doesn't know, but because she knows too well. Because once she says the name, there is no turning back. Because the truth, once spoken, becomes a weapon. And once you draw a weapon, you must be prepared to face what comes next. She exhales slowly. Her fingers tighten around the armrest of the chair. She looks at him directly, knowing he deserves the truth even if it shatters him. Charles, she begins, voice low, steady, almost sorrowful. It was someone close. Very close. Someone who should never have been near that journal at all. His pulse hammers. His jaw tightens. Who, he demands. And leans forward, her expression grave, her eyes filled with the weight of what comes next. And just as she prepares to speak the name that will launch the entire investigation, shift alliances, awaken old tensions, and set the story on its explosive course. A loud knock erupts at the door. A sharp, unexpected, urgent knock that interrupts the confession. A knock from someone who should not be awake, should not be here, should not know this conversation is happening. Charles and Anne lock eyes, frozen in fear and disbelief. Because sometimes the truth doesn't wait for you to speak it. Sometimes it walks right in. What would you do if someone you trusted most suddenly forced you to confront the skeletons you buried decades ago? That is the weight pressing down on King Charles in this fictional universe the moment the urgent knock reverberates through the study. The knock is sharp, deliberate, impossible to ignore, slicing through the tense silence like a blade. Charles's pulse quickens. His eyes dart toward the door, then back to Anne, who sits rigid, every muscle coiled with anticipation. Neither speaks. The room is thick with expectation. The firelight flickers across the walls, casting distorted shadows that mimic the turmoil in their minds. Every instinct in Charles tells him this interruption is not a coincidence, and yet he cannot move. His hands rest lightly on the table, trembling imperceptibly, because he knows that whatever walks through that door may either destroy him or confirm everything he fears. And leans slightly forward, her voice measured but firm. "Do not let fear dictate your next move," she whispers, almost to herself. But Charles barely hears her, consumed by the swirling storm of emotion inside. How do you respond to a knock that could bring a messenger of truth or a messenger of betrayal? How do you remain composed when the past, long buried, begins to claw its way back with the precision of a predator? His mind races, reconstructing the events of decades, Diana's wary glances, whispered warnings in private corridors, the tension with Camilla, the arguments that never found resolution. Every memory converges, overlapping like fragments of a puzzle that refused to fit neatly together. And now, Anne's words echo again in his mind. Someone very close touched the journal last. Close. So close he never suspected it. Close enough to manipulate the pieces behind his back. Close enough to rewrite the story he thought he controlled. Charles finally rises, moving toward the door with a combination of trepidation and determination. He reaches for the handle, and for one suspended heartbeat, the universe seems to pause. Who is out there? Is it the palace staff, a messenger, a spy? Could it be someone with access who might exploit Diana's revelations for leverage against the monarchy? The possibilities flood his mind in rapid-fire succession, each more dangerous than the last. And yet, amid the chaos of his racing thoughts, there is a sharper, more painful realization. Nothing he does now will fully protect him from the truth and is about to reveal. Nothing will undo the years of secrecy, manipulation, and hidden agendas. He turns the knob slowly, each twist echoing ominously through the hall, and pulls the door open. It's not a messenger. It's not a servant. It's someone he recognizes immediately, a figure whose presence electrifies the air, a senior aide, but one whose loyalty is notoriously complicated. In this fictional universe, this aide has always operated in the shadows, attending to matters only the king could authorize. A man who knows secrets even the royals themselves might prefer remain undiscovered. Charles swallows. He forces a polite greeting, though his voice is tighter than intended. At this hour? Is everything normal? He can feel the tension coiling in his chest. He is desperate to assert control, but the sight of the aide, combined with Anne's presence and the journal, leaves him unsteady. The aide bows slightly, expression unreadable. "Sir," he begins, carefully, "there are developments regarding Diana's documents. You may want to see them before they become public knowledge." Charles freezes. The words land like thunder, echoing in the room and rattling every fragile pretense he has held for decades. Developments. Public knowledge. The king's mind spirals instantly. Could this be a leak? Could it be a deliberate exposure meant to destabilize him? Or Camilla? Every instinct screams danger. Every muscle tightens with anticipation. And yet he feels a flicker of grim determination. He must face this head-on, or the consequences could be far worse. He glances at Anne, whose calm demeanor contrasts sharply with the storm of thoughts tearing through his mind. She nods slightly, as if to say, "This is why we are here. Face it now. Face it fully." He gestures for the aide to step inside. Every step the man takes across the marble floor feels amplified, deliberate, as though the distance itself is a drumbeat marking the unfolding tension. The aide produces another envelope, much thicker than the first, sealed with a royal insignia that has been tarnished by time. Charles's fingers brush against it, hesitating. Every nerve in his body screams that opening it will change everything, and yet he knows he cannot look away. Anne's gaze holds him steady. "Open it," she urges softly, the words carrying both command and reassurance. He breaks the seal slowly, carefully, unfolding the papers inside. And immediately his mind reels. There, before him, are copies of notes, letters, and observations that Diana herself wrote, compiled meticulously, tracing patterns of behavior, suspicious encounters, and interactions that have never been fully acknowledged. And in the margins, almost imperceptibly, someone has scribbled dates, initials, corrections. It is a map, a trail, a story told in fragments, and it all points toward a narrative that makes Charles's chest tighten with dread. Someone inside his trusted circle may have actively manipulated events around Diana, altering or concealing documents, orchestrating appearances, creating distractions, and guiding perceptions in ways designed to hide the truth. The contradictions hit him first. The polite exterior of the aide, the poised composure of Anne, the historical public narrative that has always framed Camilla in a certain light, all collide with the reality that these papers suggest. Was it coincidence that certain actions occurred when Diana seemed most vulnerable? Or was it deliberate? The documents do not accuse outright, but their weight is undeniable. Every annotation, every crossed-out line, every marginal note carries implications. Charles feels the old pang of regret and guilt, the reminder of choices he made, paths he didn't take, and the naive trust he placed in appearances. Has anyone else been watching? Has someone been manipulating him for years under the guise of loyalty? And if so, to what end? Anne watches silently, her expression unflinching, every line of her face a testament to decades of disciplined observation. She does not offer comfort. She does not attempt to soften the blow. She knows the moment calls for clarity, for acknowledgement of the reality that cannot be undone. Charles's breathing quickens, hands gripping the edge of the desk, as he realizes that what he holds is more than paper. It is a mirror reflecting hidden truths, unspoken fears, and a chain of actions that may have contributed, in this fictional universe, to Diana's tragic fate. He feels the room shrink around him. Every sound is amplified. The crackle of the fire, the rustle of paper, the distant echo of the palace clock marking time that seems far too slow and yet too relentless. And then comes the part that truly shakes him. And gestures toward one particular page, the handwriting unmistakably Diana's, but the annotations suggest knowledge she could not have possessed. The implication is subtle yet piercing. Someone else had access to her most private thoughts, someone who could influence how her warnings were interpreted or ignored. Charles's pulse hammers. He glances at and, seeking answers, seeking reassurance, seeking some fragment of truth that can anchor him. But Anne simply meets his gaze with the resolve that has always defined her. "This isn't about blame," she says softly. "Not yet. It's about understanding. And what you do next will decide everything." He asks a question he already knows the answer to, a question that cuts to the heart of his turmoil. "Are you saying?" Camilla knew. His voice is low, strained, heavy with disbelief and dread, and does not respond immediately, letting the weight of the moment settle. The silence stretches, suffocating and deliberate. Finally, she nods slowly, the motion carrying the gravity of decades of secrets, unspoken suspicions, and the realization that the monarchy's stability may rest on a single confrontation. Charles swallows hard, the words choking him. If true, the consequences ripple outward, threatening reputations, relationships, and the carefully constructed narratives of decades. It is a collision of duty, loyalty, guilt, and the inexorable demand for truth. Before he can ask more, another unexpected sound. A soft, deliberate cough at the door freezes both of them in place. The aide stiffens, Anne's eyes narrow, and Charles feels a cold dread wash over him. Someone else has arrived. Someone who shouldn't be here. Someone who may know more than they are letting on. In this fictional universe, secrets rarely stay hidden for long. And the timing, the coincidence, the sheer audacity of the intrusion, all signal that the next revelations will be more explosive than anything Charles has faced in decades. He realizes that the shock of discovering the documents is only the beginning. The consequences, personal, familial, and political, are about to unfold at a pace and intensity he cannot control. The tension hangs thick in the room, the air heavy with anticipation. Charles's gaze flits between the aide and the closed door. Every instinct tells him that this night will change everything, and nothing will ever be the same again. He feels the weight of the crown heavier than ever, as if the very essence of his role demands that he act, but also punishes him for knowing too much, too late. And just as he prepares to confront the unknown intruder, a faint sound of movement from the corridor outside reminds him that the past is never fully buried, and that truth, once glimpsed, has a way of demanding reckoning. The king straightens, swallowing his fear, bracing himself for whatever is about to enter the room, knowing in the pit of his stomach that the reaction he is about to face will define not only the rest of the night, but the entire trajectory of the royal family in this fictional timeline. The door creaks open slowly. Charles inhales sharply, heart pounding, and realizes that the shock, the betrayal, the revelation he is about to witness will leave him irrevocably changed. And the world outside the palace walls will never be the same. Have you ever experienced a moment when a single word, a single name, can shift the entire landscape of your world, rearranging the familiar into something unrecognizable? That is exactly the force hitting King Charles and Princess in the instant the intruder, a shadowy, authoritative presence from the palace staff, steps fully into the study. In this fictional universe, the air seems to condense around them, heavy and charged with a kind of electricity that signals the past is about to collide violently with the present. Charles's pulse races. Anne's hands tighten around the journal she brought. The aide stands rigid, eyes darting between the siblings, almost too aware of the storm they've inadvertently unleashed. And then, with a voice low and measured, carrying both authority and apprehension, the aide says a single name. It hangs in the room like a guillotine poised over their heads. The syllables slice through the silence, echoing off the high ceilings, reverberating across the walls, imprinting themselves on every nerve ending. Charles freezes, Anne's eyes widen, recognizing immediately the weight the name carries. They both know, instinctively, terrifyingly, that this name alters everything. In this fictional alternate universe narrative, it is the missing link, the hidden axis around which all secrets rotate. It is a name that was whispered in corridors decades ago, dismissed as paranoia, laughed off in public conversations, yet has haunted private moments, lurking in memory like a predator waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. Charles feels his knees weaken. His hand, which had been resting lightly on the desk, clenches into a fist. Anne's expression remains composed on the surface, but inside, every heartbeat is a drum of apprehension, anticipation, and an underlying dread she cannot fully mask. Have you ever known a truth you weren't ready to hear? A truth that, once spoken, changes how every memory, every decision, every interaction in your life must be reevaluated? That is the sensation gripping them both now. The aide repeats the name, slightly louder, as if forcing the syllables into the air to make them real, undeniable, irreversible. And with each repetition, Charles can feel the centuries of protocol, the meticulous choreography of public perception, and the fragile trust he has cultivated over decades starting to crumble. And leans forward, her voice steady, deliberate. "Do you understand what this implies?" she asks, her words piercing the tension like a knife. Charles swallows, his throat dry. He does understand. He feels the implications twisting in his gut. Every incident he had long dismissed as coincidence or trivial now appears in a new light, reinterpreted through the lens of suspicion, manipulation, and perhaps betrayal. He asks himself, had he ever truly known the dynamics around Diana? Had he been naive? Or had someone orchestrated events with such precision that even he could not discern the pattern until now? And most unsettling of all, could this person, whose name now hangs in the room like a dark cloud, still be influencing events from the shadows? The aide produces another envelope, slimmer this time, and slides it across the polished desk toward Charles. The weight of it is heavier than its physical mass, filled with documents, testimonies, annotations, a dossier that binds the past to the present in ways that are impossible to ignore. Charles picks it up gingerly, almost reverently, almost in fear. As he opens it, he realizes the depth of what Anne had warned him about. Inside are letters, reports, and notes, some drafted decades ago, some added more recently, all converging toward the same conclusion. The person named, the one whose identity had been whispered and dismissed, is not merely implicated in historical events, but has actively shaped them. The patterns reveal strategic movements, carefully orchestrated interventions, and a chilling level of foresight that seems almost uncanny. How could anyone manipulate so many variables, so many lives, so carefully, and remain unseen for decades? And yet here it is, undeniable, documented, and staring them in the face. Charles feels a crushing contradiction press against him. He wants to dismiss it. He wants to believe the narrative is mistaken, that the context will absolve the named individual, that loyalty or love or simple coincidence will explain what the papers imply. But each page, each annotation, each marginal note counters that instinct. The evidence is too precise, too deliberate. And Anne, watching him struggle with disbelief, remains unwavering. She knows what he fears most. That acknowledging the truth also means acknowledging the past he failed to fully protect. It means accepting that someone in their inner circle, someone trusted implicitly, had acted in ways that undermined Diana, that twisted events, that concealed critical truths. It is a moment of reckoning that has waited decades, and now it demands confrontation. Charles lifts his eyes from the dossier, looking at, and with a mixture of horror and incredulity. All these years. And it comes down to this one name. His voice is barely a whisper, yet it carries the weight of disbelief that only decades of suppressed truths can accumulate. And nods, her lips pressing together in a line of grim determination. Yes, she says, and knowing the name isn't enough. We have to understand what they did, why they did it, and how it was allowed to continue. Otherwise, the cycle will never end. The words resonate in the room with a grim finality. She is telling him that the past is not just alive, it is active. It has consequences that extend beyond what anyone could have anticipated. It demands accountability. It demands action. The contradiction here is palpable. Charles had always believed he knew the parameters of loyalty, the boundaries of influence within the palace, the actors in the drama that had defined Diana's final years. Yet this revelation shatters those assumptions. Someone he trusted implicitly, someone whose loyalty he had never questioned, is now cast in a shadow of suspicion so dense it obscures all previous understanding. The implications extend beyond personal betrayal. They affect alliances, influence succession, public perception, and the very stability of the monarchy itself in this fictional alternate universe. He must act with precision, with caution, but above all, he must act. And just as Charles begins to formulate the first steps of a response, a strategy to confront, clarify, and control the fallout, another revelation emerges from the dossier and points to a folded note within the pages, one that had been overlooked by previous generations but preserved carefully by Diana herself. Its content is brief, cryptic, yet devastating. If this reaches the wrong hands, the consequences will be irreversible. Charles feels a shiver run down his spine. The implications are clear. The named individual had power over the dissemination of Diana's truths, and by extension, the narrative that would define public understanding for decades. How many had known and chosen to ignore it? How many had acted to conceal the danger? The questions spiral, each one more unsettling than the last. At that precise moment, the aide clears his throat, a subtle reminder that he has his own role in this unfolding drama. He speaks carefully, almost measuredly. Sir, there are indications that the person named may still have influence over certain channels within the palace. Their ability to affect outcomes has not entirely diminished. Charles freezes. Influence. Still, even now, the weight of the statement presses down, a physical force that makes the room feel smaller, tighter, as though walls themselves are closing in. He looks at Anne, whose eyes convey a mixture of frustration, sorrow, and resolve. They both know that acknowledging this truth is not enough. Confronting it will be far more perilous. The king's thoughts turn inward. How could this have persisted undetected? How could someone manipulate events over decades with such subtlety and precision? How could the past, carefully curated and supposedly archived, contained fingerprints of manipulation so intentional that even he had failed to recognize them. Every scenario he imagines twists into another question, another crisis, another moral dilemma. And yet, amid the turmoil, a singular clarity emerges. The next steps will define everything. The monarchy, the family, the legacy of Diana, all will hinge on the decisions made in this room in the next hours. Failure is not merely personal. It is systemic, irreversible, potentially catastrophic. Charles opens his mouth, beginning to formulate a response, a line of inquiry, a strategy for action. But before words can leave his lips, the door creaks. Another figure appears, one Charles did not anticipate, one whose presence amplifies the tension exponentially. Their arrival is deliberate, purposeful, an intrusion into the sanctity of the room that shifts the balance of power. Charles glances at Anne, whose gaze narrows. They both recognize the truth in that entrance. This is not merely an observer. This is someone with their own agenda, someone whose arrival ensures that what is about to unfold will escalate far beyond anything previously imagined. And in that suspended instant, with hearts pounding, breaths held, and the weight of decades of secrets pressing down on them all, Charles realizes the terrifying certainty, the shock, the betrayal, the revelations contained in that single name, and the presence of this unexpected figure mean one thing above all else. The night is far from over, and the consequences are about to explode in ways no one is prepared for. What is in a name? Sometimes, it is nothing more than letters on a page. Other times, it is the fulcrum on which entire worlds pivot, the spark that ignites dormant storms, the single piece that explains every anomaly, every whisper, every shadow you thought you understood. For King Charles and Princess, and in this fictional royal universe, that name is now hanging in the room, vibrating in the air like an invisible charge, impossible to ignore, impossible to dismiss. The aide who delivered it remains silent, as though aware that uttering it even once has already shifted the balance of everything that was assumed certain. Charles can feel his pulse thundering in his temples, and his eyes narrowing slightly, calculating. Both know that whatever this name represents, it is not simply a detail. It is a revelation with the power to rewrite history, tarnish reputations, and destabilize alliances that have been carefully cultivated for decades. Charles swallows, his throat dry, his hands shaking ever so slightly as he reaches for the dossier that contains the corroborating documents. The tension in the room is suffocating. It is almost as though the walls themselves have leaned in, listening. Every decision, every interaction, every subtle maneuver of the past suddenly feels illuminated in a new, harsh light. This is the moment where disbelief and dread meet reality. He had long believed that the palace was a fortress of order, that loyalty was unshakable, that appearances masked only the minor foibles of those inside. But the name Anne has revealed, the one that she insists he confront immediately, suggests something far darker. Manipulation, deception, and calculated concealment that stretches back decades. Anne watches him carefully, noting the subtle twitch of his jaw, the widening of his eyes. In this moment, she understands that the king is grappling with a truth he instinctively recognizes but is terrified to fully accept. The aide steps forward slightly, placing a hand on the edge of the desk, a subtle but unmistakable signal. The time for hesitation is over. The name must be acknowledged. And so Charles speaks it aloud, almost reluctantly, letting the syllables roll into the air. It is not just the sound of a word. It is the invocation of a legacy, a signal flare that illuminates every corner of the palace in this fictional universe, revealing long-buried tensions, alliances, and betrayals. As he utters it, the documents on the desk seem to take on a life of their own, each note, annotation, and margin comment suddenly aligning into a coherent, horrifying narrative. Charles reads again, noting the patterns. Who was present, who could have influenced events, and who had the opportunity to conceal critical details from those who should have been informed. The connections are chilling, the timing precise, the implications unavoidable. And leans in, her voice calm but authoritative. Do you see it now, Charles? Every detail, every intervention, every silence, it all points to them. The patterns were there all along. Diana just noticed first. Charles feels a chill creep up his spine. Every incident he had previously rationalized, the curious delays, the withheld reports, the inexplicable absences, now takes on a sinister coherence. The puzzle pieces he thought were separate now form a complete, albeit disturbing, picture. He asks himself, how many times did he unknowingly play into their hands? How many decisions were subtly influenced, guided by someone whose intent he had never questioned? How much of history was quietly rewritten before it ever reached the public eye? The weight of realization is almost physical, pressing on his chest like a vice. And yet the contradiction is maddening. Charles wants to hold on to disbelief, to rationalize that the documents are incomplete, that, and is misinterpreting them, that the aide has misjudged the significance. But each page, each annotation, each obscure reference within the dossier undermines his rationalizations. The name and revealed is not a trivial detail. It is the key that unlocks decades of manipulation. It exposes actions that, in this fictional universe, extend far beyond personal betrayal. They implicate strategy, secrecy, and the very architecture of power that governs the palace. Charles realizes, with a sense of growing horror, that the person named has operated with a degree of foresight and subtlety that he himself has only recently begun to grasp. How could someone anticipate events so thoroughly, manipulate outcomes without detection, and yet remain in close proximity, fully trusted, seemingly harmless? And gestures toward a specific page in the dossier. Look at this, she says, her voice steady, commanding. Charles leans over, eyes scanning the meticulously compiled evidence. Dates, correspondences, marginal annotations. Every entry seems to corroborate the presence and influence of the person named. Every crossed-out line, every careful correction, every seemingly trivial comment suddenly carries weight, building a narrative that is impossible to dismiss. Charles feels his stomach tighten. The realization hits him like a physical blow. For decades, he has been walking in the shadow of someone whose influence and intent he had grossly underestimated. The palace, for all its grandeur and control, has been a stage for subtle manipulation. And now, the curtain is lifting. He asks, and, almost in a whisper, why now? Why bring this to light at this moment? Anne's eyes flash with a mixture of sorrow and determination. Because waiting any longer would be disastrous, she replies. Because if the truth leaks in fragments, without context, the consequences will be catastrophic. Because it is no longer just about the past, it is about what happens next. And someone has already started moving. Charles nods slowly, the implications sinking in. He understands that and is not simply revealing history. She is presenting a blueprint for action, a call to confront, to address, and perhaps to mitigate what might otherwise spiral completely out of control. Suddenly, a movement at the edge of the room draws their attention. The aide's expression tightens. A shadow appears near the doorway, subtle but deliberate, and Charles senses the intrusion is intentional. Someone else knows. Someone else has been monitoring this process, and their timing is precise. The tension in the room spikes. Charles feels the familiar pulse of dread, that creeping sensation that comes when the controlled world you believed in teeters on the edge of chaos. Every instinct tells him that the night will escalate quickly, that secrets will spill faster than anyone can contain them, and that the next few hours will determine not just the outcome of the revelations, but the stability of the family itself in this alternate universe. Charles closes his eyes briefly, summoning every ounce of composure. He knows that reacting impulsively could trigger a cascade of unintended consequences, and watches him, unwavering. The aide shifts, subtly signaling that discretion and precision are paramount. And then, in that suspended moment, Charles realizes the full gravity of what the name represents. Decades of decisions, loyalties, manipulations, and suppressed truths converge on this single point. Everything, past, present, and future, depends on the response to this revelation. A misstep, a delayed decision, or an emotional outburst could amplify the chaos. The room holds its breath with him. And just when he is about to articulate the first steps of action, when he is about to ask the aide and what measures can be taken to contain the fallout, the journal, that fragile, deceptively simple record of Diana's observations, slips slightly, revealing an additional folded page he had not noticed before. His eyes widen and leans over. The page is marked with dates, initials, and a symbol that was previously obscured by the folds. It is subtle, almost invisible, yet unmistakable once seen. Charles feels a cold shiver. The new detail confirms that the person named has operated with a precision that borders on the meticulous, tracking, influencing, manipulating events, and leaving behind traces that only the most diligent observer would notice. Every assumption he has held is now being questioned, every judgment reevaluated. He looks at, and, searching for guidance, reassurance, clarity. She meets his gaze with the stoic resolve that has carried her through decades of duty. "This is only the beginning," she says. "Everything we thought we understood about loyalty, influence, and trust is about to be tested. And the name changes everything." Charles feels the weight of her words, knowing they are both literal and symbolic. The next revelation, the full understanding of this individual's role, will not only shake their personal world, but could send shockwaves through the entire palace in this fictional universe. And just as he begins to formulate the questions that could unravel decades of secrecy, a sudden, sharp sound, unmistakable, deliberate, and urgent, comes from the corridor outside. Charles and in both freeze. The aide stiffens. The noise is not accidental. It is a herald, signaling that the events set in motion by this name are already accelerating. They realize, with a shared, terrifying certainty, that the past has never truly been silent, that influence and manipulation have quietly persisted, and that the moment of reckoning is now unavoidable. The next steps will demand courage, precision, and the willingness to confront truths that could shatter everything they have built. Have you ever remembered something so vividly that it feels like the room itself tilts around your memory? That is precisely what happens to King Charles in this fictional universe as the revelations of the previous chapters press upon him. The documents, the journal, the name, the annotations, they have stirred something deep within him, a recollection he had long suppressed, a series of fragmented moments from Diana's final days that had never fully coalesced in his mind. And now, confronted with evidence, he is forced to reconstruct the timeline in painstaking detail, confronting not only events but his own failures, his own blind spots, and the uncomfortable truth that history had been quietly manipulated around him. Have you ever wished you could undo what you now see clearly, wishing for a chance to act differently, to notice what you once ignored? That is the sensation consuming him now. Each memory is sharper, more intense, each sensation tied to emotion he had buried, and each recollection comes with a sting of regret that is almost unbearable. He begins with the nights he remembers most clearly, those final, fraught weeks, where every glance, every whispered conversation, every glance at Diana's expression hinted at unease. He remembers moments that had seemed trivial at the time. A frown she didn't explain, a sigh too long to ignore, a hesitation before a meeting, an unspoken question that she never voiced aloud. In retrospect, Charles realizes that these moments were not random. They were signals, subtle but deliberate, carefully placed by someone navigating a world where secrets were currency and appearances everything. How had he failed to see the pattern? How could he have misjudged the stakes, assumed that everything was under his control, and ignored the signs that something darker was at play? The contradictions between what he remembered and what he now reads in the documents create a gnawing tension in his chest. Each note in the dossier feels like a confirmation and a rebuke simultaneously, confirming the validity of Diana's fear, rebuking his inability to act on it. He recalls one particular night vividly. In this fictional timeline, the palace is quiet, the halls empty except for the soft hum of distant lamps and the echo of their own footsteps. Diana had lingered in a corridor longer than necessary, speaking to a trusted aide in hushed tones, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting someone to be listening. Charles had caught only fragments of the conversation, mentions of meetings, letters, and discrepancies he had dismissed at the time as administrative trivialities. But now, looking back, he recognizes the calculated intent in her words. She was leaving breadcrumbs. She was creating a trail of awareness for those she trusted, a subtle warning system against the unseen influence of someone who had long been manipulating events behind the scenes. The irony is crushing. In her fear, Diana had been meticulous, deliberate, and strategic, yet he had failed to perceive the urgency until decades later. And watches Charles as he reconstructs these memories in silence. She does not interrupt. She lets him confront the ghosts of his own mind. For in this fictional universe, confronting history requires courage and clarity. Every heartbeat is amplified, every emotion raw, every contradiction painfully apparent. Charles remembers arguments with Diana, moments of tension and misunderstanding that now, in the context of the dossier and the journal, seem almost engineered. He recalls the moments of isolation she must have felt, the subtle alienation created by those around her, and the manipulations that had been disguised as concern or protocol. The realization is dizzying. Someone he trusted, someone close, strategically positioned, had shaped her experience in ways he had neither understood nor foreseen. A pang of guilt strikes him. He had been a husband, a leader, a father. Yet the documents suggest he had been unwittingly complicit, his inaction